And the idea of having a special program at the Overby Center to remember him, I think would make him pretty happy. And I think that's why everybody here is here today, to remember him and to make him happy. I will say though, I mean, we've all been to our share of celebrations of life. And this is certainly one of those. But I have to say that this is the first time that I have participated in an event when half of the people were celebrating his life and another part were celebrating his death. And those are the people who didn't come. But you're going to hear about some of those people as we remember Clant. Now, I will say this. This is not a complete portrait of Clant. But that's Clant's fault. Clant lived in these silos where you basically got what you needed to know about Clant and nothing more.
Here's the email that was received today by the funeral home. My name is Margarita Schackelmeyer. I am from Vienna, Austria. I am more than shocked to hear about the passing away of my dear friend Clant. I had the honor to get to know Clant in 1967 when I taught him German at the Salzburg Summer School at Klesheim Castle in 1967, being a student at the University of Vienna myself at that time. It was then that our lifelong friendship began. One of the highlights being an invitation to Clant's home in Jackson, Mississippi for Thanksgiving of 1968 when I was in the States on a Fulbright scholarship. He also visited my family in Austria several times, and it was only last Christmas that we had a long talk on the phone. May I express my deepest condolences to Clant's family and his friends. My husband Reinhardt and I will never forget the wonderful times we spent together. We will greatly miss Clant.
Thank you very much.
Well, it's hard to put together in one word who Clant was. And I met him in 2015 as we had just located to Tennessee, and I had always been wanting to learn more about Big Lick. I had seen it on the internet. I'd seen it as a little kid because one of my aunts was in Tennessee, or great aunts and second aunt or something. She was showing Tennessee walking horses, and I saw some of the photos. I'm like, that's not what horses naturally do. But I guess Tennessee walking horses are very fancy if they can do that. And then the older I got, the more I learned through the internet that there was some really horrible things happening to make horses do the Big Lick. And when we moved back to Tennessee, I stumbled across this BillyGoBoy. I was like, what is that? BillyGoBoy? But it's talking all about Big Lick horses. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna dive into this. And he was doing a protest in Columbia. And I was like, well, okay, we're all over this because this is exactly what needs to happen. It will help raise awareness. So I contacted him and I'm like, hey, we will be there. And so, you know, ever since then, we've been involved in the protest. And that first year, too, I went to an auction and rescued that horse. And he had just been shown Big Lick like a few days before being auctioned off. And his legs were just raw from the cancer. And as soon as I saw him there, I was like, okay, I know who I need to talk to because Clint will know probably all about this horse. He seems like a very knowledgeable guy when it comes to Tennessee walking horses. So I called him up, I told him the name, and before I knew it, he's like, yes, this horse has done this and this and this, and he knew everything. And so I purchased the horse, and then ever since then, Clint and I have worked very closely on the Big Lick side of things. But I can tell that things were always not very easy at the protest because in Clint's mind, he had exactly how it was going to look. I think he dreamed about it for days beforehand and where every single person was going to stand and what banner and poster they were going to hold. And it made it difficult for a lot of people coming to the protest because they couldn't get him. And I was always saying, you know what, there's nobody out here like Clint doing what he can for these horses. There's nobody pounding the roads like he is, going to show after show after show. And yeah, I mean, there was a big show in Panama. It's not there anymore, and that's because of Clint. And he worked so tirelessly, but it wasn't always easy. But I always overlooked his maybe the challenging parts of his personality, because I was like, he needs all the support he can get, because he is so passionate about putting an end to this abuse to horses. And every protest I put on this shirt, and this morning I was putting on this shirt and I was like, man, we're not going to a protest, but we're gonna keep the protest going for him. We're gonna keep trying to end what he was so desperate to end. And this, last year as we were doing protests and stuff with him, I could tell his health was not good. And I was like, this is really concerning. But he did make plans with Glimmer, the horse. So I knew if something happened to him, the horse was gonna be taken care of, and the horse will be coming back to our facility. But, Tuesday we were at an auction and we rescued 2 more Tennessee walking horses, and one of them was a big lick horse. And as soon as I picked up the papers, I immediately thought, I need to let Clint know the names of these horses. And I was like, oh, he's not here. So he'll be greatly missed by so many in the world of trying to help horses. And then I go and look at the big lick side and they're celebrating. So he was very polarizing. Either you liked him or you didn't. And he wasn't afraid to speak out against the abuse. And that made a large amount of people very upset at him. And I was, right next to him when people come up and yelling at us and giving us the finger, and it's like, okay, we're just gonna stand our ground because we can do this. And so many things, he laid the path for what we're able to do. And, like in the Columbia, Tennessee Spring Jubilee show, when we first went there, you couldn't be at that park and take a photo at the show. And now he poured hours and hours and hours of his time. And now we can go there and we can take photos, because it's our constitutional right to be able to take photos in a public park. But he fought for that. And he's laid a groundwork for this journey of trying to put an end to this abuse. He laid a foundation like nobody else could have ever laid, because he was so driven by the passion he had to end the animal abuse. And now with this foundation, we can't let it crumble and fall apart. We have to come together, and I'm hoping each one of you who knew him and knew different insights can help us, because I always told him, if something happens, we're gonna keep this going. And our goal and plan is to keep it going now. But with each one of you and your support and your help and guidance on certain areas, maybe we can end this for him. And that's my goal. I just always wish, through everything, I was like, I sure hope it can end and he can see the victory. But he knew it was close, and we have to keep pushing, because if we don't keep pushing, it's not going to stop. So I am honored to be here today and speak about him, and it's just his passion and drive for helping horses and to try to put an end to this was like none other I've seen in any animal rights, animal activist, any animal person with passion. Like, he had so much drive to make a difference, and nothing was stopping him, and nothing stopped him right until the end. And he was amazing that he dedicated so much of his life and jeopardized his health to fight to the very end to make a difference. And his last Facebook post was him there trying to make a difference still. So let's just each one of us remember, and I know he would wanted it to happen, is, let's each do what we can to continue the fight that he was on to end the big lick. So, big lick, big lie, that's what you guys say.
So as Connie said, he traveled all over the country with this tireless effort. He would call me, and I said, "Where are you, Clant?" And he'd say, "Panama City." or Asheville, or no telling where he would be. But one of the places that he began to frequent and have some impact was in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
And Marty Irby has flown here today just to be with us and to share some stories about Clant. Marty has seen Clant in action in our nation's capital. It's pretty amazing what he was able to do and Marty has been able to do. So Marty, come and share with us.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here and a privilege to be here today. Clant was my friend and a dear friend, and I know I was his friend, and the reason I know I was his friend because he told me at least 1,000 times, now Marty, you're my friend, but, I think came the but, whatever it was for the day or the week. He was such a character, so unique, such a great individual, had more tenacity and passion than just about any human being I've ever met in my entire life. It's so wonderful to hear these stories about him today, and I know that he would be very proud that everyone is here sharing their thoughts about his passing. I had a ton of stories I could tell you, and I was thinking about it on the way down here. Probably the best one, I met Clant in 2013 at a press conference in Tennessee. I had just publicly come out in support of legislation to stop this soaring abuse, the big lick, that Tawny was talking about. And Clant was in the crowd, and the press conference wasn't really going in the direction that I had hoped. And I had never met him before, and he stood up and asked me a question. He steered the whole press conference in the right direction. And we met afterward and ate and got to know each other. And I had always known there was this BillyGoBoy character, and he kept it a secret probably from 1997 until about 2010 or 12, who BillyGoBoy actually was. No one really knew who he was. Just a character and a picture of Walt Whitman. And so we started working together on this issue to end soaring, and we had our ups and downs and many battles we won and many battles we lost. But probably the best thing that we did, and Clant really did most of it, I mean, this would not have happened at all without him, was I was in DC one day. I think I was running some errands. It was a Saturday, and we had a mutual friend, U.S. Senator Joe Tidings, who authored the Horse Protection Act of 1970. And he had passed away, and they were having his memorial service, and I didn't know about the service or would have gone. And Clant and I had not talked for a few months, I think, at that time, and he sent me a bunch of texts and was calling me, and I texted him back. I said, Clant, I'm tied up right now, whatever the case was. And he sent a picture of him and Nancy Pelosi. And I said, okay, you got my attention. And so I went and met him at the Harris Teeter. He always liked to talk about, we met at the Harris Teeter, and we were sitting there at the same time almost, and we were talking about Senator Tidings. We were talking about this legislation. It's called the PAST Act. And it was almost like we said it at the same time. We said, U.S. Senator Tidings PAST Act. U.S. Senator Joseph Tidings PAST Act, wherever that came from. And so Clant was telling me about the memorial service. Nancy Pelosi had actually been mentored by Senator Tidings, as had the majority leader, Steny Hoyer, in Congress on the Democrat side of the aisle. And they had known him for many, many years. And so Clant talked with Speaker Pelosi and Steny Hoyer and his grandson Ben and his daughter Mary about this issue. And Senator Tidings had really worked until he died, just like Clant, trying to stop this. He worked on it for 50 years or more. And so we ended up getting together with Speaker Pelosi and talked to her in her office in the Capitol, and took Senator Tidings' grandson with us after that. It was maybe a month or so. And we proposed to rename the PAST Act, the U.S. Senator Joseph Tidings Memorial Prevent All Soaring Tactics Act, and Clant would be very specific that I had to say it exactly like that. So, and so we worked to get all these co-sponsors. There were so many advocates all over the country that did so much, but Clant drove us. I always said, you're like the whip, Clant. You would go get more co-sponsors, and he just kept pushing me, keeping me focused, and that sort of thing. And so in July of 2019, we fortunately saw that legislation actually pass the House of Representatives by a vote of 333 to 96. And it had been long overdue. But the reason that we were able to pass it, and I don't think to this day it would have been passed, had that not happened, and he had not met Nancy Pelosi, and he had not pushed me and brought all these other people together, actually. So if you fast forward to maybe a year or two, we knew this legislation was dead on arrival in the U.S. Senate because of opposition from the Tennessee and Kentucky senators. And we tried to work out some changes and things that didn't work. But he had told me for many years he was very good friends with Senator Roger Wicker. And I said, well, Clant, if you're friends with him, get him to do something, get him to help us. And he said, I'm going to do it when the time's right. And we talked about it over the years, and finally one day he said, okay, I'm coming to DC, and I got a meeting with Roger, and I want you to go with me. I said, okay, I'll go. So I went, and you know, when you're lobbying in Congress, you have all these meetings that almost seems like the same meeting over and over again. Sometimes this was a very unique meeting. And we went in, and it was just me and him and Senator Wicker and 3 staff. And the staff came in, and Clant had pictures and videos and posters and the blue t-shirts and everything. He would always lay everything out in these meetings in Washington, D.C. And I understood finally what he was doing. He was showing the members of Congress the grassroots effort, and look what's going on. This is why you should support this. And he did that with Senator Wicker, and he talked for about 50 minutes, and usually you get maybe 30 minutes if you're lucky for a meeting, and maybe 15 of that with the member. And he listened to Clant. Clant went on for 50 minutes about this, that, and the other, and everything going on. And the staff came in 3 times and tried to get Senator Wicker to leave. He just waved them off and said, no, I'm staying here. And I've never seen that happen before. And finally, after about 50 minutes, he said, now Clant, now the staff, my bosses are gonna make me get out of here soon. He goes, I just have one thing to ask you. What in the hell is it that you want from me? And so he told him that he wanted him to support this bill, the PAST Act, and help with it. And Senator Wicker was helpful. He was actually the chair of the committee of jurisdiction over there. We still couldn't get it past the leadership. But he was just a tenacious human being, did more for this effort to end soaring than anybody I've ever known. I think he was the greatest anti-soaring advocate of all time. And you know, just to give you a final laugh, and I brought some things from Washington, D.C. with me today. You'll see here in a minute. There's a guy who's an animal advocate named Merrick Clifton that wrote an article about plant passing, and I think he talked to several of you and kind of put things together. And he, when he sent it to me, he said, you know, Clant was kind of like a jigsaw puzzle in a box of Legos amidst some Tinker toys. And I said, that's a good description. He had his way of doing things, but he was very effective and did a lot of great things. And so I hope our friend rests in peace. Thank you all. And we have a 2-part video I'd like to share with you.
Hi, I'm Bill Presley. Thousands of horse lovers and equine protection advocates, including myself, today mourn the loss of Clant Seay, the founder of the Citizens Campaign Against Big Lick Animal Cruelty, also known as BillyGoBoy, a man who worked tirelessly through rain, hail, brutal sun, and other elements, protesting the act of soaring Tennessee walking horses, a practice used to create the artificial man-made high step known as the Big Lick that's been prized in states like Mississippi, Tennessee, and others around the southeastern U.S. Clant shut down the Big Lick shows at Panama City Beach, Florida, and he shut down the Big Lick show in Jackson and other towns across America. Clant was tenacious, and he even continued his work while hooked to an oxygen tank, organizing protests after he was attacked by members of the Pro-Soaring Coalition at Asheville, North Carolina in 2021. There was no one that was boots on the ground that worked harder than Clant to pass the U.S. Senator Joseph D. Tidings Memorial Prevent All Soaring Tactics PAST Act that did finally clear the U.S. House for the first time in 2019, thanks to Clant and others. But the PAST Act has not cleared the Senate, and we must find a new path forward. I was also honored to attend and speak at Clant's symposium at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. about the issue of soaring, and remain grateful for the award the Citizens Campaign presented to me that day. While Clant may be gone, our work is not done, and we will honor him just as we have honored others in the movement who have passed by continuing his great work to help stop the soaring and save the Tennessee walking horse breed. Thank you. Godspeed, Clant Seay. Godspeed.
Hi everyone, my name is Benjamin Tidings Smith. I first met Clant at my grandfather's funeral in November of 2018. My grandfather was the late Senator Joseph Tidings, and Clant and my grandfather worked tirelessly on a number of measures. And I think that is the number one thing I'll remember about Clant. He never never backed down. The guy was tireless, and I'm going to miss him. I was telling Marty Irby that it's not going to be the same without waking up to 4 or 5 or even 10 texts from Clant some mornings. But his heart was always in the right place. He was an incredibly dynamic guy. And again, I'll say it again, I'm sincerely going to miss him. He meant a lot to me in the 5 years that I got to know him, and I know he was an important guy to my grandfather before he passed. So, rest well, my friend. I hope you see my grandfather up there, and you will be sincerely missed.
And I've asked Joyce if she'd come and share a few stories and help us remember Clant. Joyce Whittington.
I'm glad everybody got to be here today. I'm going to be very fast. A friend of ours that we had dinner with last night told him once that the Archbishop for one of the Catholic dioceses told him that if you're speaking, make it 5 minutes or less. So I hope that's what I'm going to do. The last 2 weeks have been extraordinarily difficult in one sense. I will tell you this, if you open the dictionary to a word called obstreperous, those of you who are English majors get it, you will see the words noisy and difficult to control. That would be Clant, otherwise known as Clanton Jones McInnes Seay. Wasn't he a junior? Junior. He was a junior.
Never used it.
Okay. I first met Clant in 2005 when his wife Natasha was a first-year law school student at Ole Miss, and I was the director of career services. And he and Natasha came in the summer before she ever started law school in August. And he brought her in and introduced her and said she was going to be a first-year law student, and that happened occasionally, not very often. So, I visited with them, and I'm not realizing that once school started, do y'all know what a helicopter mom is? Clant was a helicopter husband. He wanted to know everything there was to know about 1Ls, and I explained, I don't talk to 1Ls, I don't do any counseling with 1Ls until after November the 1st. That is the law according to the National Association of Law Placement, which the law school was a member of. He wanted to know her grades. He wanted to know her GPA. I explained to him that that was privileged information, thank you, federal government, that I could not, well, I'm her husband. I said, well, I really don't care you're her husband. I don't care if you're the king today. You're not going to get that. Well, I'll go upstairs and I'll talk to someone. Connie Parham was here today. Connie Parham was the registrar at that time. She called me and she said, why the hell didn't you tell me you were sending Clant up here? And I said, well, I can't. We need to share Clant. We're going to have to share it for the next 3 years because none of us can take him on by ourselves. Then he came in one day and said, Natasha's going to need some suits to interview. Where can we get them? I said, not here. You're going to have to go to Memphis. And I said, but why do you need to know? He said, well, I'm going to take her up there and we're going to have her try on suits and I'm going to pick them out. I said, Clant, she has lots of girlfriends. This is a ladies' thing. Let her go. No, I have to go. I have to see. And then he'd come in and say, what about a red suit? Can she wear a red suit? I said, sure, she can wear a red suit, but she needs at least one black suit. Well, why? I said, Clant, I've had enough of you today. And I referred to him as being in Clant world. And I would say, Clant, this is not Clant world. This is Natasha world. And you need to get out of her world and leave her the hell alone and let her be a student. Well, he'd get mad and he'd disappear. But don't worry, he'd be back within 24 hours. He'd stick his head in, can we talk? I said, about what? What do we need to talk about? She's not even gotten through her first year yet. We'll talk about it later. Then she graduated in 2008. And by that time, everyone in administration knew Clant, from the dean. He would show up at the dean's office and I'd get a call from the dean's secretary, and she said, why didn't you call me and tell me Clant was on his way up here? He would just appear in people's offices. He never had an appointment. But for those 3 years, his job, as far as he was concerned, was to get Natasha to the top of the class, doing the best she could to get her settled. And he pretty much did that. About 3 or 4 years later, it must have been about 2011, 2012, he reappeared alone. They were in the middle of an extraordinarily acrimonious divorce. And I basically told him, I said, you need a hobby. You need to find something else to do. You need to leave her the hell alone. She's got a good job. You need to decide where you're going to land. And he took up the horse thing. And that's when my husband and I learned everything we needed to know about big lick, horse soaring, what you needed to do, what you didn't need to do. And Clant was always amazed. I told him the closest I've ever been to a horse was at Mardi Gras. He thought that was awful. I think he thought everybody should know a horse, have a horse, be a horse. And he just thought something was terrible. But you know, I was a military kid, and we just didn't do horses. We learned all about it. He was attending all these horse shows. He was very passionate about it. He shared very little, as Charles has told you. Clant was, you either knew everything or you knew nothing about someone. We pretty much knew nothing. But one thing I did find out is when he traveled to a lot of these horse shows, including the one in Tunica, he was wrapped up with that for a while. He traveled with security. He traveled with a videographer. How many of you know anybody else that travels with security unless they're a prince, a pope, or a politician in this country? I'm going, you know, and Clant was not a little bitty guy. Clant was a big guy. But he always traveled with that. He was very secretive about a lot of things. And in the beginning, he would, you know, he didn't have a home here in Oxford. He didn't have an apartment, he didn't have a house. Where you stay, Clant? I'm just at one of the hotels. He would stay at different hotels everywhere he went. But one of the things, when he popped into town, you said, where have you been? Well, you don't need to know that. Where are you going? You don't need to know that. But one thing that was sure, he always asked, my son is here, Ryan Whittington in the back. Ryan works for the university. Every time Clant could not get the computer or the phone or anything he wanted to work, he called my child. And I would tell Ryan, don't answer the phone, it's Clant, he needs you to do something. And then Clant would say, well, I need to touch base with Ryan. I said, Clant, it's 11 o'clock. He's got a newborn. He's not gonna be up. Call him in the morning or go ahead and text him. And then the next day, Mom, Clant called me last night, 11:15. Then we had our grandbaby, and he went through a kind of thing for about a month. Well, send me a picture of Adeline, so I'd shoot him a picture. Things were walking along, and then last year, we could tell he wasn't doing well. And I asked him one time, I knew his sats were low. He could hardly talk on the phone. And I asked him, I said, is there, I also need to tell you this, I sent him to one of the best cardiologists out of Stern, here in Oxford. I sent him to a #1 lung man, pulmonary doc. Clant didn't like either one of them. The reason Clant didn't like either one of them is because they did not tell Clant what Clant wanted to hear. And finally I said, is there any chance that you have pulmonary fibrosis? And there's this dead silence, and then he hung up on me. So I got an email later, and he said, why do you think that? And I said, because I've seen this before in several people close to me. And you have got to behave yourself. You've got to settle down somewhere. He ended up getting an apartment here probably 4 or 5 years ago. Several times Daryl and I would pick him up and take him to the hospital. We've also, things were so bad at the hospital. He thought these nurses and people were his runners. He would say, can you pick up the checks that are at Pack Mail and bring them to me? And you don't have to come up to the room, just leave them at the front desk. Can you come by and pick these checks up and take them to the bank? I've already talked to someone named Brooke, and you know where to take them. And I told my husband one day, I said, when he leaves this hospital, they're gonna bar the door, and then I'm gonna let him come back. So he left the hospital here and went to Water Valley. And then he said, well, you know, they're wanting me to leave and go home. I said, well, that's what doctors do when they think you're well, Clant, you go home. Well, of course, in the middle of all this, he was told last fall that he had to get out of his apartment because they were turning him into condos. Clant seems old and he wasn't moving anywhere. He said, I'm an old man and I'm sick and I'm not gonna do this. So he didn't move. Therefore, he got a letter in January. I know because I got it at my house and I opened it and I shot him a picture of it. Because, you know, we got his mail at our house a lot of the time. So I told him, I said, you're gonna have to get out. So on Sunday, before he died on Monday night, I got a copy of 2 emails. One was to a place that was gonna move all of his stuff, put it all in boxes. The other was from the place he was gonna move it to. I said, okay, that's taken care of. Maybe, but I wasn't sure at that point. So you can imagine our surprise. Our phone rang at 1:45 on Monday night, and your immediate thought is your grandbaby who has been sick, or your son who grew up with asthma. And I answered the phone, and this young man said, is this Joyce Whittington? And I said, yes. And he identified himself as a nurse from ICU. And I said, I think maybe you've made a mistake. And he said, no, I'm supposed to let you know if something happens to this gentleman. And I said, I still think you've made a mistake. Who is it? And then when he told me, I said, how did you get my name and number? And he said, you're listed on the documents as the person we're supposed to call if something happens to him. And I said, do we need to come there? He said, no, ma'am, you just wait. So I'm thinking, okay, I need to get up, I need to get dressed. Daryl needs to get up, he needs to get dressed. And 5 minutes to 12, they called back and said Clant had expired. Now, Clant had been doing so well. He did tell me on Sunday, he said, things aren't going really well, and I think I've convinced him I need to go to ICU. Now, that's the other thing. Clant, when he decided he needed to be in the hospital, it wasn't up to the doctors to admit it. He just appeared at the ER and explained to them that they needed to keep him. He did the same thing when he went to Water Valley, and I didn't know until today the way he got back to Oxford was a taxi brought him because he didn't like the doctor telling him that he could go home. So we got this news, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, my husband wakes up and he said, what are you doing? Why are all the lights on? I said, I'm making a list. He said, what are you making a list? And I had written funeral home, coroner. Y'all, I'd never met a coroner, much less talked to him on the phone. Hospital, Overbeat, didn't know how to get in touch with Charles. I knew there was a sister, I didn't know her last name. Was there a will somewhere? Y'all, there is no will. Okay, y'all all need a will. I don't care how old you are. This here is a result of not having a will. If he were to walk in right now, first I'd slap the fire out of him, and then I'd give him a hug. But he didn't have a will that we know of. Now, he may have one, but it's hidden somewhere because we don't know where it is. So I had all this stuff written down, and I'm thinking, oh, we got to do the mail. And my husband said, I said, okay, here's the bottom line. We have Clant's body. I don't know if he wants a funeral. I don't know if he wants to be buried. I don't know if he wants to be cremated. Then what are we supposed to do with his ashes? I don't know how to get in touch with his sister. He has an apartment that's full of stuff. Because, you know, Clant was a hoarder of paper. If he touched a piece of paper, it got saved. So I said, I'm sure there's hundreds of boxes that got saved. And I said, oh, and here's the best part. Daryl said, what is it? I said, we now have a horse. Oh. Think about it. Because Clant told me several years ago when he moved Glimmer here, even though he kept saying he was going to take me there, and then I had to get a new knee, and then I got a new hip, and then he got sick, and then he said, well, you know, I'm the only person that knows where Glimmer is. And I said, well, let's hope you live 30 or 40 more years, because if something happens to you, how the hell am I supposed to know where this horse is? He never told me where Glimmer was. It took several days and a number of phone calls, very surreptitious phone calls, because horse people do not share their telephone numbers. So I learned to always say, please have this person call me, because I knew they weren't going to give me a phone number or I could call them. I told my child, he said, we have a horse. I said, no, we do not have a horse. I've got to find Glimmer's mama and make sure Glimmer goes back home. I'm very proud to report that out of all the things that we ended up having to do, we do have Clant's ashes here. If he wanted to be buried, he should have told me. He didn't do that. Because here he is, he's here today. He arrived from Tupelo. Glimmer has a new home. His mama's gonna take him back, so we don't have to worry about that. The storage unit's another whole story. The bank's another whole story. Like I said, I've had a really hard 2 weeks. But one thing I can tell you, he would love it here today. And the first reason he would love it here is his friends are here. You know, Clant was a schmoozer. He loved gossip. He would come and he'd sit at our table and get him a cup of coffee. What have you heard about so-and-so? And then he would come and he would say, do you know so-and-so? And I say, no. And then he would spend 30 minutes telling me about this person that I didn't know and didn't really want to know anything about. But he had to tell me because I felt like I'm the only one in town, Gerald's the only one in town that he's got to talk to. If he were here today, he'd love being in the Overby Center. He'd love being with his friends. He would love knowing Glimmer has got a home. Everything would be right in Clant world, which is what I used to call it. I will say one thing for everybody. Any of you that don't have a will, write a handwritten. In fact, it's interesting. Y'all may laugh, but our son just turned 36 last week. We had dinner with a friend from Memphis last night, and first thing I told him, I said, "Can I hire you to do something?" And he said, "What?" And I said, "Ryan and Beth don't have a will." He said, "I will write you a will, but I'm not going to charge you." I said, "We just need 2 simple wills. That's all we need." Because like I said, if he were to walk in now, I'd slap him.
Thank you, boys.
You might dollar.
For many of you who may not know, or maybe you know now, Clant was a veteran, and we all should respect the veterans that have fought for this country and served our country. He was in the Army, and he told me that he was in the Army, but he never really shared a story about it. But he always wore that gray Army T-shirt with the black letters across the front of it on many occasions. And so I talked with Senator Wicker's office earlier this week, and we had this American flag flown over the United States Capitol in memory and in honor of our friend Clant Seay. So I'd like to give it to his sister Ethel, and I have a box to go with it too, with an official certificate. Yep.
We want to thank all of you for coming. We're honored by your presence. Clant is honored by your presence. At the end of our programs, we always say, okay, are there any questions for the panelists? Are there any observations? So if you would like to share right now any observation or questions, we'd be happy to take it before we close out. We're honored to have the forums with us. Yes.
I'd like to say
Please.
something. Do you want me to just stand from here?
We have a microphone here, and you could come stand right here. It'd probably work best.
I'll come
If you don't
down
mind,
there.
why don't you just let her come here?
Yeah, I'll come down there.
Yeah, good.
It's probably, yes, less likelihood of me falling. Hey, I'm Christina Gray, and I'm honored beyond, almost beyond words, but certainly not beyond tears, to say that Clant was a friend of mine and my husband's. We got to know him 2014, I think it was, shortly a protest in Nashville. And I want y'all all to know that he was a fine, fine man. And you're absolutely right. I've stood with him. I've been threatened with arrest standing there with him on multiple occasions. I've been threatened with physical violence and had that security you spoke of protecting us. And my goodness, did he take care of us. This is a creed he lived and died by. The flag that you're holding meant so much to him. He spoke over the years. He stayed with us a couple times and traveled. I've traveled hither and yon in the commitment to the cause that he lived for. He came to believe near the last few years of his life. He told me on more than one occasion that he felt God was moving through what he was doing. And if he accomplished one thing in his entire life to defeat Big Lick, everything he'd been through in his life was worth it. And I have to say that's just a remarkable thing with all the suffering that he went through physically and being ostracized and attacked by people physically and in the press. And to be able to say that everything that he'd gone through was worth it to achieve this goal. And also, Hazel, he talked to me about you so many times, and his family and other friends. I've heard about the trailer story many times. And I just want y'all all to know that even though he compartmentalized each one of us, I know that each person in this room was dear to him. And knowing him was just one of the great honors of my life. God bless you. Rest well.
Anybody else?
I'm a Clant sister. Clant was a complicated person, as most of you know, and we had a complicated relationship. We were a complicated household. But he honored his parents, he honored our family, he honored everything he was ever taught. We were born loving horses, both of us. And I don't think anything he ever did could have made any of our family more proud than his taking up the diesel it costs and the animal cruelty costs, because that's what he was about. And he always stood by what he believed. That's it. Thank y'all for being here. Seriously.
Thank you. Anybody else?